Hi everyone. If you started watching this lecture, the one that I posted yesterday, you discovered that at minute 7, it went to a black screen, and I have not been able to figure out why that happened. So I am re-recording this lecture on selecting type. You've heard a lot about type structure and different categories of type. I'm going to talk more about that today. You've also heard about the history of type. And now today, what I want to talk to you about is how do you pick type for a project? Think of type this way. Typography is imagery. It isn't just a set of letters. It's words and ideas. Typography is the vehicle to express those ideas most effectively. What does that mean? Well, for one thing, type has personality. If you've looked online or even looked on your computer, you know that there are hundreds and actually thousands of typefaces that are available. Why are there so many? Because every typeface created by a designer expresses something different, or that's their hope. There are a lot of similar fonts. Some are much more effectively designed than others. However, every typeface is an art form that expresses an idea, and it is imagery. There are two main areas I'm going to cover today. First of all, it's considering your audience message and medium when you're picking a typeface. The other thing I'm going to talk about is how to pair a typeface with a project, and I'm going to review how to mix typefaces. This is in your book, and it was also in a lecture last week, but it's very important because on this week's quiz, you're going to be shown some typefaces and asked to identify what category they're in. So we're going to review that again today. Now, when you're picking a font, the first thing you want to consider is AMM. Audience, who are you trying to reach? Message, what is your product? What is what you're designing trying to say? And the medium is it a poster? Is it a website? Is it a resume? More on that in a second. First of all, audience. Ask yourself, who am I designing this for? This is a lot about demographics, but it's also about something that we call psychographics. Psychographics is what people's values are and interests are, and that is something you need to consider. But start with their age. What are their interests? What is their income? Where do they live? Maybe income isn't important. Maybe where they live isn't important, but decide what is relevant to the project you're designing. And then, of course, you want to also consider their psychographics. Psychographics being, what are their values? Are they conservative? Are they liberal? Are they religious? Are they non-religious? Are they environmentalists? Are they eco-friendly? Are they sustainable? Do they believe in owning guns? All of these things would influence, as much as anything, these things influence what kinds of typefaces you pick. But avoid stereotyping. I've seen it happen all the time. Young people stereotype what people my age, I'm 62 years old, but I'm different from every other 62-year-old. So be careful putting an age on a typeface, because I feel that age generally is less relevant than interests and values. Some grandmothers surf. So you want to ask yourself, oops, I got that out of order. Here's a grandmother surfing illustration, which I really like. And look at the typeface they picked for this. Life is just beginning, right? Is that a grandmotherly font? It's a hand-drawn font, but someone did not hand letter this. This is a typeface. And it is, how would you describe it? It's somewhat playful. It's fresh. It's lively. It's not a deep, serious font. It's not Times New Roman. It's not modern. It's not a modern. It's not Dido. It's not a modern serif font, which would not be appropriate for this. So a grandmother surfing, what typeface does that bring to mind to you? And this hand-lettered font that's a sans serif certainly does that for me. So what you're asking yourself is, what typefaces will appeal to this audience? How do you do that? Well, you look at the typefaces you have, and you can find them on your computer for the most part, but you can also download fonts. You look at the typefaces you have and you say to yourself, which of these typefaces looks like my audience? Then you have to think about the message of your communication. The message is the purpose of your design. So maybe it's to get people to buy something, or maybe it's to get as one of the posters that you're going to be picking type for in a project that I'm going to explain in a second. Maybe it's a poster or a flyer to get people to a golf tournament. So how do I dress this message to say golf tournament? And how do I make it appropriate for the audience that this flyer is appealing to? In this case, it's retired people. Retired people come attend a golf tournament. What typeface would you pick for that? It doesn't have to be the most, a stodgy sans serif. A stodgy serif font. It might be something else. It might be this slab serif, which is not necessarily contingent on somebody's age. But does it say golfing? These are the questions to ask yourself. The message, though, is also about tone. What is the tone of your message? Is it upbeat? Serious? Playful? When we look at this grandmother font, we would say that's a playful image, and it deserves a playful, lively font, which is exactly what this is. So what is the message, and what typefaces are appropriate to communicate the message? And then we need to consider the medium. What is the medium you are designing? Ask yourself, is it a poster? A resume? Some kind of flyer? Is it a website? Why this is important is because size and purpose, but size affects the sizing of the type. The size of the medium affects the size of the type you need to put on it. It also affects the kind of typeface you pick. I'm going to show you some examples, but if you were designing a poster that people had to see, say, from 20 feet away, what typeface would you put on it? Would you put a modern serif typeface that has a lot of difference between the thick and the thin of the letters? Would people be able to read that from a distance? Or would you pick a solid sans serif font? Or a typeface like this font, a slab serif, which is also very solid and readable as well as legible from a distance. A reminder of the difference between legibility and readability. Readability is a block of text. Can I read this typeface in a big block of text? Legibility is, can I read this in larger text? People who make signs are they concern themselves with legibility. That's why a stop sign is in real basic sans serif letters. Now, we don't even have to see the letters to know that it's a stop sign because the shape and color of that sign are universal. However, a sign for a business, a billboard that you're designing, you can't make the type too small. The type really has to stand out. What kind of typefaces do I pick for something that people are going to drive by at 80 miles an hour? And a good designer's editor is also considering how many words can I have on this billboard. You've probably all had the experience of driving past a billboard and trying to read it and realizing that you couldn't read all of it or see what was on there. And that's really frustrating. That's an inappropriate selection of type. Okay, now for some examples. I'm going to show you some different kinds of examples today, some to inspire you that are the product of, or the work of type designers and graphic designers. But I'm going to show you some posters, and I'm also going to show you some other mediums, but you're going to be picking type and color for 3 posters as the project that you're doing after your video postcard. Well, for some of you, you've turned in your video postcard. For my class, you're turning that in Friday. Here is a poster designed in 1983. Think about that. This poster is almost 40 years old. But I bet you, if you saw this poster today, if the date weren't on there or the year weren't on there, you would have no idea what year this was designed. That is how powerfully effective this design is. It looks so simple. And the thing about great designs is that really great design looks like it was easy to make, and it was likely the end process. What you're seeing is the end result of a complicated, long process of design and tweaking and experimentation. So this Give Blood poster, first of all, think about it. It's type only. There's no image on here, but do you need an image? No. You could say to yourself, well, this isn't very, it looks like a command, right? It doesn't look very friendly. But it is a very effective representation of the message, Give Blood. Now let's think about what the designer was thinking when he or she made their decisions. First of all, this is a sans serif font. You see on posters, many posters use sans serifs, and the reason is because they're legible from a distance. They're also really legible on backgrounds like photos. Now this sans serif font, there are so many sans serif fonts, and I assure you this designer went through many, many, many fonts to find one that would work. What are some of the things that aspects of this font that make it work? Well, very importantly, notice how the width of the letters is the same. If you look at some sans serif fonts, the B might be narrower than the G or an O. They don't occupy the same space, except for, you know, the vertical letters like L and I. These letters all essentially can align. So that's part of it. Then the typographer or designer spent a lot of time formatting this type, formatting it so that the G and the B connected so that the I and the L could connect. How do you do that? Well, you can't do it easily in Word, but in InDesign, you can do it simply by taking leading out from between the lines. This is what we actually call negative leading, where a descender overlaps an ascender. So there's no space between these letters. So they just scooched it together until the letters touched. Now what makes this work, think about the message, Give Blood, and look at how, what is the effect of these words touching? Does it look like a circulatory system? A vascular system in which blood is running from one word or one person into another person? I think that it does, and I think that that was a motivator behind for the designer designing the poster in this way. And then, of course, using red to signify blood. Now, here's another poster, it probably done for a community so that different blood banks could use the same poster. Now, if I had to compare this one to this one, There's no doubt that I find this one much more effective. Is this ineffective? Not necessarily. But the image itself is good, but sort of strange. Because we have this hand coming down into the poster. I guess it looks a little creepy to me, which I don't think was, I'm sure wasn't the intent. And then we have this blood, bag of blood, either going into or out of a person, although this is not where you would insert the needle for that. Picking a sans serif font. Now, I would have probably tried more different sans serifs to land on one that I think is a little bit stronger than this one. However, one thing this designer did, if this was the intent, was to connect the I and the V, so this looks like IV. I'm guessing that's what the designer was thinking. The imagery would certainly get your attention. And if the message is give blood or give a hand to those in serious need of blood, the message, the visual, and the words and the design of the words are connected. Here we have a poster, God Bless America. I don't know, I can't find the history on this. I am confident that this design is at least 50, maybe 60 years old. Using a sans serif font. Consider for a moment, why designers so often pick sans serifs? Well, part of it is, big part of it is, apart from legibility, is that when you add serifs, remember serifs are what come off of the letter. When you add serifs on a word, then it makes spacing those words much more challenging. This is another font in which a sans serif in which the width of the letters is the same. So the G aligns with the A. Now the M is a little bit wider, as M's typically are, but for the most part, these letters occupy the same width of space. Now we have a poster. Well, actually, it was a magazine page designed in 1980 by one of the 20th century's best-known designers. His name was Herb Lubalin. Herb Lubalin started a magazine called Avant Garde. He designed a typeface called Avant Garde. And in his magazine, there were a lot of illustrations. So this particular one won an award. But I want you to think about what was Herb Lubalin thinking when he created this design. We talk about how the message, how the typeface and the formatting of the typeface needs to express the message. And the message in 1980 is America in distress. Now, interestingly, this is another one of those designs that if you saw it today, you would not know that this wasn't a contemporary design, because great design is timeless. So what does he do to create distress? Turns the flag upside down. But think about the font for a second. How does he create the feeling of distress in this type design? It's obviously a play on this original design, God Bless America. America in distress. Well, what I would say is he's picked a vertical compressed sans serif, which in itself looks stressed, right? And then he's taken all of the space out between the letters. He's crammed the letters together, and that creates this feeling of distress and stress and anxiety that spacing the letters out would not. Here's some other Here's some other type treatments and type designs of Herb Llewellyn. Look at each one. Marriage. The R's are facing like two people. So in this case, the type design is expressing the word. Mother and child, in which he has beautifully snuggled an ampersand, which is also looks like a child, inside of an O, which represents the womb. And families, where he's added a dot to an L to create the impression of a father, mother, and child. Now, just a few things about what was in play when he was selecting these typefaces. Marriage is in a sans serif font, and it's a font called Optima. The thing about Optima is it's an unusual sans serif in which, remember the word transition. Transition is the difference between the thick and the thin of the letter. In families, there's really no transition in the shape of the letter. In Optima, there's a little bit of transition between the thin part of the letter and the thicker part of the letter. So this is a sans serif. Remember I talked about humanist fonts. Humanist meaning having a more human quality. This is not a hard-edged font. It's a softer sans serif because it's got some transition in the letters. It looks warmer than a lot of sans serifs. But most importantly, and I'm sure what factored into his selection here, is he went through a lot of R's. A lot of R's to find the two that he could put together that would look like people. This R might do, except it would have to be adjusted because this descender, or this leg of the letter, comes out farther, you see, than the R. So he would have to make some adjustments. So an R turned the other way could be nose to nose. So those two R's could be nose to nose like people. And then here he's picked a sans serif font, but it's a friendly looking sans serif. And he did this for a Reader's Digest for a publication called Families. Now, when you look at these, they seem kind of obvious, but from the perspective of, because as you look at them, you think, well, you know, I could have thought of that, but many, many thousands of people could not have thought of this. It's about using your imagination to picture what can happen with letters. And with this font, Mother, the serif font, does express something more warm than a sans serif. However, what was really important was finding a typeface with an ampersand, which he had to turn on its side. And he may have also done some design adjustment too, that would look like a child. Look at ampersands. Go through your type library and look at ampersands in different fonts, and you'll understand the challenge of finding just the right ampersand that could snuggle in the womb of that O. Here's a poster. There was a whole series of posters that came out after the Joplin tornado, and they were all on this theme, kind of a retro look, but rebuilding. So what they did was they created a typeface that was bricked. You can make that as a background in Illustrator. And it's a sans serif font, legible in a large size, but it's a particular sans serif. See these A's? This particular sans serif feels like something that you might see on a poster in 1940, 1945. It looks somewhat like the posters of that era that were for World War II to get people to give money and time to help in the cause of the war. Smoking reduces weight one lung at a time. Apologies for the bitmapped, but I downloaded this from the internet and it didn't enlarge very well. These would be solid letters. However, here's a great example, again, of just using type to communicate a message. Smoking reduces weight. Using a sans serif font, but using a sans serif font in three different versions, going from heavy to light, right? The type is losing weight, and that's communicating the message. Some type families have many different versions. And if you do the drop-down menu on different typefaces, even in Word, on your computer, you'll see that there are many different versions. Look at Helvetica. Helvetica has its condensed versions, light versions, regular versions. There's another typeface called Franklin Gothic, which this might be. Franklin Gothic comes in heavy, regular, light, demi-bold, plus others. This is typeface from the spread of a magazine. I'm picking it because it looks very simple, but it communicates very clearly a connection between image and type, right? The favors of men. So first of all, we need to find a typeface that expresses men. And that would seem to be a sans serif in this case. Also, we want to make that typeface very, very big. So what sans serif are we going to pick for that? We're going to pick one that is fairly condensed so I can make the letters as tall as possible in the space. Also, this layout does something, one of my rules of thumb with design is designers start with the picture. And I say, let the picture tell you what to do with the design. By that I mean it can tell you where to align things, also what typefaces to pick. And in this case, we have these legs. And this leg, which takes you up into the title, which also looks somewhat like legs. Different media require different typefaces, and on online you see a lot of sans serifs because sans serifs are really easy to read on a screen because they're backlit. Now, the New York Times, the Washington Post, traditional papers, they use serif fonts. But I would ask you to go to the New York Times and look very closely at the serif font that it's using for its text. It is a very what we call monochromatic, very little transition in the shape of these letters, which was what makes it as a sans serif, as a serif font readable on a screen. So here we see BuzzFeed sans serif. Also, this sans serif is, it's pretty vanilla, and BuzzFeed has a really big demographic in terms of age and location. Psychographically, it's probably liberal, but demographically, it's a wide range of ages. Here we have a typeface, a designer named Roger Black, and I'm providing this example just because, listen to me, usually you don't want to use more than 2 typefaces on a page. Most of the time, many times you can get by with just one font. He's using here 4 typefaces. This is maybe 5. This is not for the faint of heart, but Roger Black has designed so many magazines and newspapers. He designed Rolling Stone, USA Today, major newspapers. He's redesigned newspapers. He's worked for a variety of magazines. So what has he selected? Well, this is a slab serif. This is his signature font for his name. This is a regular, old-style serif font. I'm going to go through the categories in a second. We'll back up to this. This is the italic version of this serif font. This is a font I'm pretty sure is typewriter. Not a conservative choice, but it has serifs. A typewriter is a kind of slab serif. It's not the same as the one in his name, but it's legible because The proportions of the letters are so even. There's very little transition from thick to thin in the shape of these letters. Here we have a sans serif that he's using for this caption. Here is the same typewriter font as he's using here. And here we have a typeface called Bodoni Poster. This one has massive difference between the thick and the thin of the letter. Can you see that? Look at the top of the O. Look at the left part of the A here. That massive difference, that massive transition means that this font can only be used, it's called Bodoni Poster for a reason, it can only be used in larger sizes. This would not be legible. This would not be readable. Readability being blocks of text. This would not be readable on this page. And a couple of resumes. So the thing about resumes is, remember, it's an 8.5 by 11 sheet. So let's talk about audience, message, and purpose. The audience, a business. The message, it has to be, here, the message is, I'm polished and professional. And so the message is hire me, or at least interview me. And the tone is professional. And the medium is 8.5 by 11. Courtney, this is a real resume. It's beautifully done. She designed it herself in InDesign. She's using a sans serif font, which it happens to be one that I really like, called Bebas Neue. You can download it, I believe, off DaFont. And she's using all caps. So it's very professional and businesslike, but also modern, polished. Looks like the kind of typeface a designer would use. And she's combining it with a serif font. The serif font being, I'm going to guess that the serif font is Garamond. So two contrasting fonts, but only two fonts in this page. Then we have this one that I downloaded from the internet. Now, just a word, there are a lot of templates on the internet for resumes, and they're not all good. Some of them are actually bloody horrible. I can't believe someone paid them to make them. However, this one, not too bad. She's made her name very big. In this template, your name is very big. I question whether a name needs to be that big on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. It's a bold move. But the thing I want to point out here is one typeface. This is all just the same sans serif font, but this is in all caps. All right, a review of the categories. You will be tested about these. You're quizzed about these this week. Your book also has these examples. So please review your book, as well as this lecture, as well as last week's lecture if you need to. The categories of type: old style, modern, slab, sans, scripts, and decoratives. An old style serif font has transition in the letters between thick and thin, but it's not a dramatic transition. This makes it an ideal choice for smaller type sizes. So Garamond here, and Garamond here, or something close to Garamond. And you see here, this is a serif. This extension from the letter, the top, the bottom, this part of the letter that comes out like this is a serif. Even the serifs themselves, there's transition in the form of a bracket. Then we have the modern serifs. A huge amount of transition in the moderns. Notice how thin this part of the letter is. versus this thick part. The serifs themselves are very thin. We call these hairline serifs. There's no transition. Now, what you need to know about this is a modern serif, because of the difference in transition, it's the least ideal, well, except for a decorative or a script font, but among the basic fonts, it's the least ideal in small sizes. And by small sizes, I mean something smaller than 12 point, even 12 point modern font, 12 point Dido. Put something in 12 point Dido that's on your computer, an email that you're writing, or just a paper that you're working on, and you will see how that font is not nearly as legible as Times New Roman. And it's because of the weight. It's because of the transition. It's very uneven to look at. It becomes very spotty in small sizes. Whereas old style serifs are more even. Then we have the slab serifs. How do you know if it's a slab serif? Well, it has serifs. You see, this is coming off the letter. But what marks this as a slab serif is that the serif is squared off at the end. Sometimes, and you'll see an example in your book called Cheltenham, there's a little bit of a bracket, the bracket being the thing that goes like that. There's a little bit of bracket on the serif. But the key characteristic is that the serif is squared off. That, in fact, is the category of type, a typeface called, I am actually using Rockwell in my lectures. I like it because the letters, there's no transition. The letters are completely monotone, and it's very readable on a screen. We have sans serifs. Sans means without in Latin, without serifs. And you look at this font, you can see there is no serif happening here off the ends of these letters. So these are the four to concern yourself with for the quiz. These are the four that I will be asking about, or the questions will relate to. What category is this? And this, and this. But there are two other categories that she has created. One is for scripts and one is for decorative fonts. Script fonts, there are so many scripts, some that are really flowery and, to my way of thinking, gross, because I'm not a flowery person. Some like this one that are a little more playful and retro and easier to read. Some scripts are very difficult to read, and some are easier to read, like Sign Painter. Nevertheless, you do not want to use a script font in extensive copy. Same with the decoratives. How do you know it's a decorative? If you put a bunch of text in it and you don't want to read that text, then you know that's a decorative font. Now, why is it important to know the categories? Because knowing the categories tells you how you can put them together. Every font family, every font, and we go back to this, Garamond, that's a family name. Just like my name, Halstead, right? Just like that last name that you have is your family name. But you know, your family members, they don't all look alike. Do you look like your siblings? Do you look exactly like your parents? No, you're all different versions of each other. My family were all different versions of Halstead, right? Well, those different versions also happen in type families. So when you have a boldface version, you have Arial Bold, Arial Heavy, Arial Regular. Those are all different versions of the family of Arial. Same with Dido, same with Rockwell. So if you mix two fonts within the same family, you mix Arial Bold with Arial Regular, you mix Helvetica Narrow with Helvetica Bold, that is called concord. Concord means it's harmonious. So you have harmony when you mix different versions of the same font. Likewise, if you mix really different fonts, in this case, I'm mixing a sans serif with a serif font, you have contrast. Both of these things, fine to do. So a guiding principle is, and it's the one used by Courtney Deason, use two different categories, a sans serif category and a serif category, an old style serif category. Roger Black, all different categories here. Well, these are both slab serifs, kinds of slab serifs. He knows what he's doing. But here we have a decorative font. Here we have an old style serif font. Here we have a slab serif font. Here we just have a different version of this serif. So that's concord, contrast, contrast, and then a sans serif, which is yet another category. So he's got 1, 2, 3, 4 categories of typefaces on this page. Only let Roger Black do that because it's very difficult. It's a very difficult thing to do and do well. What you don't want to do is mix two fonts within the same category. So you don't want to mix Arial and Helvetica. You don't want to mix Times New Roman and Garamond. They're different, sure, but they're not different enough. Here I am mixing, it keeps changing this on me. These, I don't know why it's doing this. I'm not having the best luck with PowerPoint today. I'm having a Monday with PowerPoint and also apparently with Camtasia. So this is actually a slab serif and this is a sans serif. But if you were to mix two sans serifs, two slab serifs, two different ones, two different family names, two different modern serifs, two different old style serifs, you're going to have conflict and not contrast or concord. Here's an example from Wired Magazine, just to show you mixing what is this? Modern serif. You can see by the very big difference in the thin and the thick part of the letter, and a sans serif. So a little bit of a quiz for you to do in your mind, and I will give you the answer. Can you mix these? Are you saying yes to yourself? Now you might be looking at this and you think, I don't like these together. That's another choice, but following the rules that I've given you and that your book gives you about how you can mix fonts, can you mix these? Well, if you're saying yes, then you're right. And the reason is because these are two different categories of font. We have a slab serif, you see that, squared off, and we have an old style serif, which you can see by the transition in the letter and these kind of bracketed serifs. So this is what we call contrast. Can you mix these? If you're saying yes to yourself, you would be right. Here we've got a serif font, an old style serif, right? You can see from the transition, and a sans serif. Can you mix these? Well, I just gave you the answer to that, so I hope you're saying yes. You can mix Arial bold and Arial. And what do we call that? That's harmony. That's concord, because both of these are in the same family. They both have the family name Arial. So the poster assignment you're going to do, you're going to be given 3 posters, not 1 but 3, with different audiences and purposes. And you're going to select and format the type. You will also select colors. You haven't had lectures yet on color, but those are coming. So I think by the end of next week, you will have the tools to do this. It's due November 6th. You're going to do one. So the 3 posters, our fantastic adjunct professor, Macy, has created these, and she has made them so bland, really suitably bland, because what we want you to do, you won't change the format, you won't move the art around, but you're going to look at this poster, Lake Quivira Country Club, 18-hole golf tournament presented by the Golden Years of Overland Park, Kansas. So you're going to have to think about the medium, which is a poster, the message, which is come to the golf tournament, right? And what's the tone going to be? And who's the audience for this? Who are the Golden Years Country Club? They are this dude. This dude who looks like Hemingway, as in the writer, Ernest, playing golf in this awesome orange shirt with a pretty good looking swing there, right? Some really good golfers who are older. So what will you pick? So you'll pick some typefaces, you'll size them so that there's hierarchy. What do you want us to look at first, second, and third? What's most important? You want to put that type biggest. You're also going to do one for the Greater Kansas City Area Chamber of Commerce, Diversity in the Workplace. Picking different fonts, resizing them, picking colors. And one for the River Rat Skate Shop. You're going to think about an audience, skaters. Who is that? Who are they? What's the message? Buy our stuff. What's the medium? It's an ad. Okay, everyone, that's all for today. And please remember to review, importantly, categories of type and also what you need to consider with AMM.